If you're a student, like me, you'll know that studying during the pandemic has placed a lot of extra pressure on our finances. Maybe you're having to pay for university accommodation that you can't use, or your finances might be suffering because you can't get a part-time job. So, what can you do? Well, I've been speaking to students here in Manchester and beyond about how to negotiate a rent rebate and share some tips on how you can complain effectively and manage your finances.
So, how does it feel that you've been away from your accommodation for so long but are still paying?
It was really tough on myself and my flatmates, and as time went on, 12 times complaining about something really takes it out on your mental health. I think we just felt completely ignored. At this point we'd been ignored by the government for however many months. Universities hadn't really done anything. We hadn't been in university, and now the accommodation that we're actually paying for is also ignoring us. I think the situation for students is so awful, and it almost feels, it feels like we're kind of the forgotten victims of the pandemic, because our accommodation providers, landlords, even, some universities, they're not doing anything for people living there.
I think it's indicative of the way that students have been treated so far throughout this pandemic. There's a reluctancy not just from the providers of private accommodation, but sometimes from the universities themselves. It creates sometimes more problems for students than they solve, and it creates a lot of worry. And I think that that's quite a big thing, especially in this uncertain period. I mean, I've paid $5,000 for something that I haven't used for nearly 5 months.
Yeah, that sounds immensely frustrating. So you've moved home. Tell us about what the financial situation is regarding your accommodation. Have you had any rebates?
Unite have. So at first they offered us 50% off of 4 weeks rent. So for me, I pay around £95.94 for 1 week. So that would have amounted to just over £100, which is, shocking. Now they've extended that period, so it's now 7 weeks, which amounts to £335.81. So that would mean if I still had to pay my third instalment, I would be paying £3,789 for the year, which, it's not really that much. It's not that much of a discount, considering I'm not going to return and I haven't been there since the 18th of December.
Unite Students has now extended its 50% rental discount for a further 3 weeks, up until the end of March. In a statement on its website, it has said, all Unite Students customers signed legally binding agreements for the 2020-2021 academic year against a backdrop of COVID-19. However, this discount recognises these are exceptional circumstances, which Unite Students has taken into account.
Just talk to me about the financial aspects. You mentioned that your student loan doesn't even cover your accommodation costs and you've had to top that up with a job. Given that you're not even using your accommodation, how has that made you feel? Has it been difficult to cope with?
Yeah, it has been really hard. I have really struggled mentally. I was actually signed off work for 8 weeks, 4 weeks for my mental health, because it's really taken it out on me. I think it's hard enough knowing that you're losing money, and even harder knowing that you're losing money that, you don't really have. Because I think my part-time job, the money that I earn from that has to cover my living costs, and that includes my phone bill, my mobile data that I use when the internet isn't working, food, absolutely kind of everything apart from my rent. And then I also still have to use some of that money to top up my rent.
The pandemic has laid bare the problems with student living, but even before then, accommodation was unaffordable for many. Rent prices have been increasing year on year, swallowing up nearly 3/4 of the student loan on average. That's pushing more students into financial hardship, yet roughly 2/3 of institutions have no affordability policy. The impact of all this? Anxiety. Nearly 2/3 of students say worrying about rent payments impact their mental health, according to Unipol. But what students want at the moment is relatively simple.
They need to acknowledge that what we were given isn't what we were promised or sold, and I think they need to look for a way of paying people back, because nobody wanted this. I'm sure they didn't want it either, but there are a lot of people who've spent a lot of money on something that they haven't been able to use. If you're going to advertise something, you've got to know if it's got the longevity, if there's a chance that it's going to happen. Instead of running headfirst into trying to sell as many rooms as possible and book again for next year, when a lot of people haven't even been there yet. They haven't even gone to uni this year.
So what have you done to try and complain to Unite or get a rent rebate? And have you considered a rent strike?
I know a lot of students are rent striking. For me, I physically can't do that. I'm hoping to be a teacher next year. I'm going to be beginning my PGCE in primary education, and I firstly can't have a black mark kind of on my name, and secondly we signed guarantor forms and my mum is on there, so if I did a rent strike I risk the bailiffs turning up and knocking on my mum's door, which my mum can't afford, and I think it's something that I wish I could do but I can't.
As you can see, students are frustrated, but if you are trying to negotiate a rent rebate or complain, here are some tips. They helped our house secure a 3-month refund last term worth almost £1,700. First, if you're looking for a rebate related to the pandemic, it's largely up to your landlord's discretion. Some universities who own their own halls of residence have been very generous. Operators of private halls like Unite, the UK's biggest, have announced refund policies, so keep up to date with what yours is offering. The hardest of all, private landlords. But even so, if you don't ask, you don't get. So explain your predicament and ask what's possible. They may well be flexible. And in the description below is a link to an open template published by Exeter University's Union, which you could use. 2. Find out more about your rights through reading your tenancy agreement. If you feel the landlord is not fulfilling their obligations, send an email stating exactly which clauses you think they're breaching and challenge them. And don't forget to keep a written log of your emails. And finally, just beware with rent strikes, which is deliberately withholding rent in a protest against your landlord. As Charlotte said, if you had to provide a rental guarantor when you signed your lease, if you don't pay your rent for whatever reason, the landlord has the legal right to chase them for payment. These 3 tips helped me. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe as we have more on the way. Thanks for watching, and just a reminder, if you are at secondary school, you can access ft.com for free, and the link is in the description below.